Your YouTube feed probably has blown up in the last couple weeks, as did mine, as Sony dropped another camera and lens, the a6400 and the 70-200 f4 GII Macro version 2, as well as a very cool microphone. Again, Sony saves the best for last sometimes. The camera is their top-of-the-line APS-C sensor camera and has some of the new features, including AI focus from the A7R5, as well as a beefier build quality. They also upgraded the 70-200 G lens with this new version, which includes a macro capability. Although to get 1:1 macro, you have to put on a 2x extender and be at 200 millimeters. And because of that, I'm not going to be ditching my 90 macro anytime soon, which I use a lot for weddings. I'm Paul Giroux. I'm a photographer and filmmaker who has been working full-time in this field for over 3 decades. I thought it was ironic that this camera and lens were announced just about 9 years after I made the switch to Sony from Canon because of the original a6000 and 70-200 G. That camera and lens combination proved to me that Sony was onto something, and that little camera could track at 11 frames a second. And I was a bit relieved that that lens was only an f4 because it was so much lighter than the 70-200 2.8 Canon EF that I had sold. I was actually more of a fan of the Canon f4 line, whether it's the 70-200 f4 or even the old 80-200 f4L FD lens from the 80s. This recent announcement also made me realize that we're pretty much at stasis for lenses, at least for me, in terms of what I want and what I need. This lens makes it the 80th E-mount lens and the 50th full-frame E-mount lens, so Sony has been working their tail off in the last 9 years. In the early days of Sony, the cameras were also making major advances in screen refresh, resolution, and autofocus, and now have become the de facto state-of-the-art. I was always buying, selling, and upgrading because the cameras from one generation to the next were just such a great advantage and improvement. But really, since 2018 and the A7R III, the A9, the A9 II, and even the A7 III, we've pretty much got most of what we really need. The current cameras are so good, the lenses are also very good, and there's very little that I want or need in the future, but there's a couple. Sony will obviously make upgrades and bring out new cameras. Maybe, perhaps soon an A9 III that will go 60 frames a second instead of the current 20 frames a second of the A9 II. But even if it does, the 30 frames per second of the A1 kind of leaves me overwhelmed with images from a sporting event. So I'm not sure that 60 frames a second is going to be such a big thing for me anyway. Another thing that I expect them to do is upgrade the AI, because just like any computer, these things will get faster, and these cameras are definitely a computer that happens to take photos. But what will be a real upgrade in terms of the future? Perhaps it will be 8K video that gives us 30 megapixel stills and a compression algorithm that makes the file sizes manageable and is as flexible to grade as a still RAW file. And then we'll just be shooting all video, perhaps. I don't know, it's just a guess. I'd like to see them make it even easier to get photos from the camera to Facebook, to Instagram, to offsite storage, and to the internet. But how do you do that? I just don't know. There are very few gaps in the lineup, but the ones that are there are glaring, including the lack of a 300 2.8. And I'm surprised that they haven't come out with one by now. Canon made that their first flagship lens when they switched to EOS from FD back in the late 80s, or even a 300 f4. Perhaps they feel that the zooms adequately cover those ranges, I'm not sure, but I know that many sports purists would love to see Sony address those basic gaps right now, and perhaps add something like a 150-400 f4 without a converter, but that would still probably be a lens in the 7 to 10K range, so it's not going to be a lens that sells bazillions of copies, but I could be wrong. But more likely it's going to be geared to sports shooters for the wires and agencies, especially with the Paris Olympics coming up in 2024. Would I buy that lens? Doubtful. But it's a lens that both Nikon and Canon have, and Sony probably should, especially for the Olympics and professional sports photographers. What I would like to see is Sony update some of their older lenses in their current lineup. A lens that is in desperate need of refresh is the 16-35 f2.8 G Master lens. A lens that I've had and sold, as I didn't use that focal length much, and it was a bit big and heavy. I also had the 85-1.4, and I sold it too because it was big, heavy, a bit slow and a bit loud on autofocus, especially for video. And I would love to see them rework the 100 to 400 f4 to 5.6 G Master lens. Now that last one came out in 2017, and while it's surprisingly old, it's also surprisingly great. I would love to see it incorporate the linear motors that are on this new 70 to 200 f4G, which actually looks like the Mini 100 to 400. I don't need it to have internal zoom. External would be fine because it will keep that lens smaller and lighter. And after using the 100 to 400 G Master, I really didn't mind the way that it extended when it zoomed because the lens was so small and portable and easy to carry and maneuver. Speaking of smaller and lighter, I noticed that as I continue in this career, I'm feeling the weight of the gear even more. Sure, mirrorless is significantly lighter over the old DSLR boat anchors, but the lenses, especially the premium ones, are still rather large and heavy. On our recent family vacation to Paris, I had the 50-1.2 G Master and the 135-1.8 G Master with me, but I rarely brought them out. They were just so heavy to carry in the backpack. And so often on a daily basis, I just took an a7R5 and the 24-70 2.8 G Master, and that was sufficient. And when I got there, I wish I had brought the 20-70 f4G because that would have made the best choice probably for those day hikes when I needed to be lighter. And although I'm not really a big fan of the APS-C lineup, I think Sony's real innovations are aimed at the full-frame cameras. There is a side of me that is envious of my friend Bob Christ, who has shrunk his kit down to only APS-C line and the 1-inch RX lineup. His lenses are smaller, the bodies are smaller, and the quality is still phenomenal. In fact, at a recent movie theater screening of his work, the projectionist mentioned that the quality from Bob's tiny cameras was every bit as solid as any Hollywood feature film. Now maybe I'll get there, but I'm not quite there yet. But the weight savings is hugely appealing to me now, especially after walking thousands of steps on our recent vacation. I'm relieved that now I'm not worrying about whatever comes out next in both bodies and lenses. I've got enough. Now it is really time to get to know what I have because I'm holding onto them much longer and not simply leapfrogging from one iteration to the next every 12 to 18 months. Back then I needed to, now not so much. In fact, those older cameras still do a great job and are an incredible value. The latest and greatest, while very nice, are not necessarily as critical. The glass is there, sensors are there, dynamic range is there. Now it's just a matter of what features will you pony up the dollars. Since there's not really a bad camera out in the market now, it's more about finding the gear and the brand that works for the work you do, the way you want to work, and how much gear you want to carry on your back. No matter your choice, whether it's full frame, APS-C, or even the 1-inch RX lineup, you can make films and photos that pros 30 years ago would envy and covet. Now it's about making work that I feel really excited about and I feel that is improving, but not so much about the technical aspects like pixels or that sensor has, but more in things like movements in video and better moments in stills and better post-production skills for both stills and video. The tools are obviously important, but they can all do pretty much everything now, except brush your teeth. 9 years later, and I've come full circle with Sony. I'm grateful for where I am and with what I have. And when I get stressed, I try to remember that Roger Deakins makes movies with a single camera and a single focal length lens for the most part. Just watch 1917 and be amazed. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you soon.